Bullshido. Noun. Slang for martial arts fraud, especially exaggerating fraudulent claims regarding the biography, lineage, skills, experience of martial art instructors or yourself. This is the story of Frank Dukes and Bloodsport. Thank you for tuning in to the debut episode of the Placeholder podcast featuring Dan and Shane, where we take two ideas and make one unique thing. Hope you enjoy the show. And we are live. I just want to thank our audience for tuning in to the Placeholder podcast, where we take two ideas and explore them in a form of storytelling through this podcast. Tonight's episode is very special because we are exploring the story of Frank Dukes and the 1980s classic Bloodsport, starring Jean-Claude Van Damme, Forrest Whitaker, and Lily Chow. So before we get this thing started, Dan, can you tell us a little bit more about Bloodsport and what you know?
Jean-Claude Van Damme goes AWOL from the military to fight in the super secret underground fight tournament, which he calls the Kumite.
So this is a thing that kind of blew my mind. I watched this movie a lot growing up as a kid. Being Asian, martial arts movies just come with the territory, right? Majority of martial arts were developed in Asia, and this is just kind of like the genre of, I guess, like culture. And it wasn't until years into our friendship, like well into our 20s, maybe even our 30s, that I discovered through you that this movie was supposed to be based on a true story.
Right. So if you remember in the movie at the very end, they have these like sort of epilogue little stats. Like, no, it has a freeze frame on the character, it has a bunch of his real life stories. And it was like the real life story of Frank Dukes. And he had all these records, had this fight record, and was the Kumite champion for this and this and this, and presented all these facts as if it were true. And indeed, though, if you do any research into Frank Dukes, you quickly realize he is a massive conman and charlatan.
There was like this era of mysticism back before the first UFCs, where if you knew martial arts and if you had a black belt or a gold belt or a red master's belt, you didn't really question it. It was just, this guy knows what he's doing. His hands are registered as deadly weapons, and you just kind of accepted it as fact. There was no way of like really fact checking this stuff.
A common area for people to bullshit and just kind of play out their fantasies in these little cult-like communities, these little McDojos, where people believe their sensei is some high secret mystical ninja character. And they want to believe that because that's so cool, and it inspires them. Like, I could be a magical ninja person too if I just keep studying hard under this person. And I remember when I was watching this movie and I saw the credits at the end, I was completely sold. I'm like, man, Frank Dukes holds the fastest record for a knockout in the underground Kumite.
Okay, wait. Tell our listeners a little bit more about this underground Kumite. Like, what are the rules and how is this all set up?
I know the Frank Dukes version is that it's a 60-person tournament, which I also feel is bullshit, because you would want to have 64 people for a tournament, right? Like, you wouldn't just want 60. You're giving, like, what, 4 guys a bye? That's not really what you want in a fighting tournament.
How many 60 people in how many days?
Like 3 days or something like that. I forget how many days it was, but it wasn't many. It was like a one trip sort of ordeal.
Was this a full contact event, or was Frank Dukes's
full
tournament
contact,
experience?
no rules, sort of secret tournament?
Okay. For our listeners, the significance of that is in the days of the early UFCs, I'm not quite sure the exact number, but I want to say it was a 10 or an 8-person event where they'd have to fight martial arts versus martial arts to find out who styles best. Royce Gracie won the first few UFCs, with the exception of one, he had to withdraw from injuries, and he only fought, I think, twice that day.
Yeah.
So the idea of a 60-man tournament in 2 or 3 days is,
That'd be around 6 fights, I believe.
which is ludicrous itself, but once again speaks to the era of these mystical martial arts claims. Yeah, kind of putting that in perspective for some people who are not familiar with the UFC. Professional boxers fight 3 to 4 times in a year.
Yeah, it's just another example of the many ridiculous claims of Frank Dukes. So actually, let's talk about Frank Dukes for a while. What do you know of Frank Dukes?
I only know the name from Bloodsport. Like I said, my knowledge of this movie was I was always under the impression that this was purely fictional, and it wasn't until you brought it to light that at the end of the movie they claim that this is all real. So you have to fill me in.
Well, so Frank Dukes is an amazing character. He is a charlatan to the bone, in my opinion. And I did a deep dive before this, and not a deep dive, but looked at some basic claims that he's made over his life. So the first one is claims that his neighbor, the Japanese ninja, is named Senzo Tiger Tanaka. And the name Senzo Tanaka actually comes from a James Bond novel where he's a master ninja.
No way.
And when people brought this up to Frank Dukes, this is a perfect sign of an excellent con man, an excellent grifter. Is they called him out on this, and he doubles down on it by just making up another lie. He just says, "Oh yeah, Ian Fleming based him on the real person, Senzo Tanaka." But that's what you can do in the charlatan. Is you just keep going with the lie, and if people don't care enough or they don't have the neat stuff looked up, yeah, you'll get away with it. So then this kumite he claimed that happened in Bahamas. Apparently people or journalists have found that the trophy he claimed was from it was made in California at a local trophy shop. He claimed his father worked for Mossad, the secret intelligence agency of Israel, before Israel and Mossad existed. And he released a book in 1996 claiming he worked in the CIA after being directly recruited by the director of the CIA himself. He claims that the director met him at a urinal at a bar and introduced himself by saying, "I'm the fucking director of the CIA."
So
and not only did he was directly recruited by the director of the entire CIA, William Casey, was his handler and the only person who knew that Frank was a CIA agent.
So what happens each time he gets outed?
Nothing.
Nothing.
There's a big report, I think it was by the LA Times, one journalist that really kind of blew up this expose, and that's kind of where I got some of these facts from.
Okay.
But generally, yeah, nothing happened. This book he released in 1996 claimed to be this secret CIA agent where he went on secret missions to Nicaragua to pull up fuel depots. He was in a joint CIA KGB operation inside the Soviet Union. He was the sole survivor of a 5-man parachuting squad that tried to destroy chemical weapons in Iraq. All these claims he made in 1996. He still took part in writing and I think it was just writing, but for the movie The Quest. Like he was still connected to this sort of scene in Hollywood, making these easy action films. In many ways, sort of conned his way into these things.
This can translate to film, regardless if the stories are true or not.
I think a lot of the people involved in making this movie, they knew Frank was telling tall tales, and they knew they thought oh, maybe there's some truth to it. Maybe he did fight in some sort of underground thing, but all these details are just tall tales. I wanted to bring up this one Frank Dukes line I found from an interview. This is a softball interview, and the journalist is just sort of going along with what Frank says, but he asked Frank Dukes, I suspect that part of the reason why Bloodsport worked is because based on your experiences, you'll be able to bring a certain authenticity to it. And Frank Duke, replies yeah, I think so. They like it because it's authentic. And the interviewer asks again, how much of the movie is accurate? Frank Duke's first response was, the fighting scenes were very accurate. That's basically how the fights went. So based on that quote, how realistic do you think these fights have been in this movie so far?
Some of them actually kind of look legit. Jackson's character just clubbing someone and one-shotting them, but the Rochambeau of exchanging Muay Thai kicks to the ribs is ridiculous.
Sorry. I would say Jean-Claude Van Damme's fights have actually probably been among the most unrealistic.
Okay, so we're at the climax of this movie, and Jean-Claude Van Damme's character is fighting Bolo Yeung, or Chong Li. The ring is destroyed in a way that it's kind of making the shape of a V, and Bolo has brought an illegal substance, a crotch pill, and he turned that into powder and threw it in Van Damme's eyes. The idea of someone bringing an illegal substance to blind your opponent, as far-fetched as it is, using crotch powder, actually happened in a championship fight with Muhammad Ali and Sonny Liston.
Oh, really?
Something was applied to Sonny Liston's gloves, and Ali actually fought blind for one round, and there was like actually a look on his face that automatically the announcers actually brought that up and said something's in Ali's eyes.
Interesting.
Yeah, so he fought.
So maybe this is all just a true story.
Maybe, and Ali did train karate, right? So you never know. Did you have to do the threat awareness in your Taekwondo class?
I don't remember. I don't think so. I think it was like mentioned that like there's methods to it, but I don't think I actually ever learned it.
Okay, so this kind of builds on the mysticism of martial arts, but I recall my dad telling me the story about a place in the Philippines called the Casa de Siete or Casa de la Siete, which is the House of Seven. And you would go into this, essentially this combat room, blindfolded, and you would be attacked one by one by 7 individuals, and it was to the death. And if you survived, you became an official master. Not a word of a lie, and he pitched the story, and he will still pitch the story to this day.
Yeah, is that not true?
But the thing is, right?
That is amazing. That's these sort of like, I can understand how like wushu films come into being based off like historical characters, because it's just sort of these people telling these tall tales about martial arts, and it becomes this sort of like mythology.
So I think how do you think these get started? Do you think they go the Frank Dukes way of, I'm just going to tell a lie, and if you try and bust me, I'll tell a more impressive lie? Or do you think that someone who did the death touch actually one-shot knocked out someone and accidentally killed someone, and he just said, oh yeah, I applied this technique and it was a cover?
I think in terms of like wushu films and a lot of these stories, like what your dad said about this house or whatever, it's probably tall tales that get exaggerated the more the tales gets removed from like what inspired it. So like you think about like those wushu films about like, you know, these historical Chinese generals like Zhao Zhao that are so powerful and strong, like all the dynasty warrior characters, they're all like historical people, but they all have like, people always assign these like superhero powers to them. It's probably just at his time he was really good. One generation removed later, the stories get taller and taller and taller, and like the further away you move from this origins, the more they're less stories about people and more they become sort of fables about myths and like moral lessons.
So do you think that the era of the tall tales are over now that we have YouTube, or for a very terrible example, World Star, where everyone has access to a camera?
I think they serve a different purpose than the stories that tell us like about history and historical fact. People kind of attach themselves to stories with like these moral undergroundings for their own psychological benefit, I would say. Like the internet isn't going to make, you know, fairy tales disappear. People are still going to read fairy tales for their children because they serve a different purpose. It's not going to stop us from reading fantasy stories that kind of also serve similar purposes. But I think the era of tall tales being the predominant way in which we culturally understand stories has disappeared.
Okay, very interesting. I'm curious. I'm not quite sure where to sit on which side of the fence of that. I guess skeptic or realist says that we now live in a world of show and prove. So I feel that at least in a martial arts aspect.
Show and prove?
Yes, at least in a martial arts aspect.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think we can all think of things we see in pop media that prove that we still have a media circuit where a lot of untruths and myths can proliferate. I mean, look at, no matter what side of politics you want, you look at politics right now, and there's a lot of misleading stuff out there. But within the martial arts community, definitely this has changed. I'm looking at the screen now in the movie, and I'm at the epilogue where they tell the facts about Frank Duke. It says here, from 1975 to 1980, Frank Duke fought 329 matches, and he retired undefeated as the world heavyweight full contact Kumite champion.
Ugh.
So, as a kid, I read this. This sounds like them saying this is a true story and this is what he did after the events of this movie. So now that I've told you that Frank Dukes is a grifter and full of crap, does that change your opinion of this movie at all from when you thought it was?
No. What's actually really interesting, and I'm not quite sure if that's Frank Dukes' design, is that I'm actually more interested in Frank Dukes. Knowing that.
Why is that?
I think the expression is never let the truth get in the way of a good story.
Yep.
I'm interested to learn more about the story. I think the fact that it's so preposterous and out there, it doesn't take away from the movie. In fact, I think it makes it more enjoyable. The fact that we could do a podcast because of the story of Frank Dukes and his absurd lies kind of adds to the charm of the movie. What do you think?
I think this movie is, in a very sort of way, it's a good representation of my stereotype of the 80s, in that this entire movie is a grift. It's a movie by a grifter where the movie is the grift. Hollywood has a lot of movies about grifters. You can talk about like The Wolf of Wall Street. I'm sure the director would say The Wolf of Wall Street is about the degradation of a man's soul or some bullshit like that. But what it really did was make stealing other people's money while doing loads of coke and quaaludes with high-end hookers really, really cool. And Hollywood loves these movies because it's the grifter coming up on top, and sometimes he has a redemption story, sometimes he has his comeuppance. But the theme of a lot of these movies are just that, grifting is cool and it's interesting. Catch Me As You Can is a great example. Like, he was a great grifter and it's interesting. This movie itself is a grift because it made a great movie. He got away with it for so many years. He made multiple other movies, and it's such an outrageous grift, but he produced a great movie, and at the end of the day, it didn't hurt anyone. The backstory of Frank Dukes, his real backstory is actually more interesting than his fake backstory. His fake backstory is like a cliched 10-year-old idea of what a G.I. Joe TV show should be about. Real Frank Dukes is an interesting man with some serious psychological problems and just the courage to double down on this wild bullshit. And it's a nice little lesson for if you ever have imposter syndrome, like whatever you're putting on your resume that's you're fluffing up ain't nothing to what Frank Dukes lies about.
That's the
real inspiring story. That's the real, I would say, moral of the story is you too can bullshit yourself so far in life that Hollywood would make a movie celebrating that bullshit.
For me, like, for the amount of outrageous he brought, like, that guy deserves like to have his story told. I mean,
yeah, it's an incredible story.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so here's I guess we're trying to do like the related and recommendations. All right, so where does this rank in your top 5 Van Damme movies?
For Van Damme movies, I really liked like the Universal Soldier series as a kid.
Okay, so you put Universal Soldier at 1?
I haven't thought about what movies he's been in a long time, but I remember as a kid I've watched most of the Van Damme movies as a kid. I don't think I've rewatched very many except for Bloodsport just now. But I would say Universal Soldier, then probably Bloodsport. Yeah. I don't know. How about you? Do you have any strong opinions on Jean-Claude Van Damme movies?
Street Fighter's top 5.
Oh, have you seen the new one he did? Like, or not new now, but the one he did was his comeback. That was really serious and won awards.
JCVD.
JCVD.
Yeah, I was gonna say that fills up the last spot. So I have like
Okay.
the more
I
ridiculous.
haven't seen that one, but I feel like I should before I can claim to make a proper Jean-Claude Van Damme list.
He has an opening monologue that's really well done and beautiful. Like I highly recommend it. Like his acting is like legit. It's super good, and he plays himself.
That does make the acting easier, doesn't it?
He plays himself playing like a fictionalized version of himself in his brain.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, like it's really nice. I don't know, but I think that is the end of our episode. So if you want to hear more about this Placeholder podcast, or you want to give us a name, let us know. And yeah, thanks. Okay, I think that's where we cut it.
Oh my god.
So that is the story of Frankie Dukes. We leave you with this podcast wondering, should the truth ever get in the way of a good story? What other tall tales do you know, and what other tall tales would you like to have us cover? We thank you for listening to the Placeholder podcast. Tune in next week for our next episode covering cheaters.